This week, Florida lawmakers wrapped up a special session, and what they did in less than 48 hours could change the balance of power in Washington, D.C. Both chambers passed a new congressional map. It now awaits the governor's signature, and the U.S. Supreme Court has handed Governor DeSantis the legal cover that he needed. All of this happening in the same week.
Florida is one of 8 states redrawing congressional boundaries mid-decade at President Trump's urging. 5 Republican-controlled, 3 Democrat-controlled. Texas, Missouri, and North Carolina have already moved, flipping seats towards Republicans. California counterattacked with Proposition 50, turning 5 Republican districts Democratic. And last month, Virginia voters approved a new map that could flip 4 more seats to Democrats. Standing in Florida's way has been the Fair Districts Amendment. It's a 16-year-old provision in our state constitution that bars partisan gerrymandering and codifies the racial protections of the Federal Voting Rights Act. This week, that protection was challenged from 2 directions at once. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in Calais versus Louisiana. It strikes down Louisiana's majority black congressional map and narrowing Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, to win a discrimination challenge, plaintiffs must prove intentional discrimination, not just its effect. Justice Elena Kagan warning in the dissent that it renders the heart of the VRA, quote, all but a dead letter, end quote. On the same morning in Tallahassee, the Florida House passed Governor DeSantis' new 24-4 map. The map eliminates 4 of Florida's Democratic seats in Congress. The targets? Tampa's Kathy Castor, Orlando's Darren Soto, and 2 South Florida veteran lawmakers, Lois Frankel and Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Both chambers have passed the map. The governor's signature is expected shortly. The Supreme Court ruling is in. The question now is, will these new congressional lines survive in court? To help us understand what that means for Florida voters and for the Constitution itself is Chara Torres-Spelisi. She is a constitutional law professor at Stetson University College of Law. She is also a board member of the government ethics watchdog known as CREW, that stands for the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to ask you first how you see this in the state. What stood out most for you on the state side? And then I'll ask you about what happened in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Sure. I think this new decision from the Supreme Court highlights the power of map drawing in terms of legislative districts. With gerrymandering, not only can a small majority in a state turn that majority into a supermajority in a legislature, what's really sort of horrifying about gerrymandering is that a minority of voters can get a majority in a legislature. And so what is at risk here is literally majority rule.
How does the Supreme Court ruling impact what's happening with us in Florida?
Well, I think Florida is a prime example of this phenomenon. In Florida's 14.3 million registered voters, only 41% of them are Republicans. So the map that was just produced by the Florida legislature makes a super majority of the Florida delegation to Congress into Republican-leaning seats. And I think that is the danger that was unleashed by the Supreme Court yesterday.
The Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried, also the Deputy House Democratic Whip Darrell Campbell, have promised to challenge the Florida's new map in court. They are also promising to create an independent redistricting commission to look at the reapportionment process. Does that effort become null and void by this ruling at the Supreme Court?
No, actually, reforms like the Fair District Amendment to the Florida Constitution and independent redistricting commissions are more important now than ever. So the challenge to the new map will be under the Florida state constitution, which says that you cannot target and benefit incumbents, and you can't target or benefit a political party, which is, it looks like exactly what they just did. So I think this map is vulnerable under the Florida Constitution. And one of the ways we will get out of this problem is adopting an independent redistricting commission. So in the House of Representatives, it is majority rule. And so it matters an enormous amount who has the gavel. And even if both houses flipped, the president would still have veto power. And so one of the key issues in the upcoming election is, what are the margins if it does flip? So the president can veto anything he disagrees with, but then it goes back to the House and the Senate. And if they can override that veto by a 2/3 majority, then that's one way of getting laws that even the President of the United States disagrees with.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was Chara Torres Spelisi from Stetson Law School.
Thank you.
And now we want to bring in our panel. Daryl, I'd like to start with you. You were part of a landmark redistricting cases back in the 90s. When you think of what was going on then and now, what strikes you the most?
Well, what strikes me the most is much of what was done in the 1990s, which was to increase minority representation both among African Americans and Hispanics, is likely to go out the window with the redrawing that has just been done. You know, reapportionment has been described as, it's just like the family portrait. The only thing you care about is how you came out, and the heck with everyone else. And there's a great deal of truth to that, because politics is very personal and reapportionment is very personal. Every member of the legislature wants to know, what have they done to my district? Am I going to be better off or worse off? And we know that there are a number of people, particularly Democrats, who are going to be much worse off because we've seen the numbers in terms of fewer Democrats in those districts and more Republicans, and it's trouble. But one thing to remember is there's no guarantee. People keep talking about, well, Republicans will pick up 4 seats in Florida. I'm going to tell you right now, there's no guarantee that Republicans are going to pick up 4 seats in Florida. In fact, if you look at those 4 districts, one of those districts is a toss-up district. I mean, it's pretty neutral. 2 of the districts lean slightly towards the Republicans, and only one of those districts is a strong Republican district. So that's likely to go Republican, but the other 3 districts, I think, you know, the voters always surprise the politicians.
And let's talk about voters. What does this new map mean for voters in Tampa Bay?
Well, it means that they may have different candidates running because the candidates that they voted for in the past will no longer be on the ballot. They've looked at what the district lines are going to be in the district that they're running from, and they're going to decide it's not worth it. It's not worth my time. It's not worth raising a lot of money to run in this district, which I will have little chance at winning. And that's one of the negative effects of reapportionment and gerrymandering. And so I think you're going to see a lot less candidate choice, but particularly with respect to African Americans and Hispanics.
And many voters are asking, why would Governor DeSantis be pushing this at this time, at this particular time? Yeah. How do you see that?
Well, politics, and politics. He's doing it because he wants to get in the good graces of President Trump. He's seen what happened to Texas when they reapportioned and created potentially 5 new Republican districts in that state. He did it because he's interested in his own political future. He's going to be out of a job soon. He did run for president in the past.
In your experience, you told me how things are so different now that one person, the governor, was able to present this new map, and that in the past you saw things very differently. There was groups of people that worked on a new map. Can you explain that?
Well, the reapportionment process in the past in Florida, every time there was reapportionment scheduled, the legislature would hold a number of committees throughout the state of Florida. I mean, they didn't make people come to Tallahassee, they went to the people. And in most cases, there were anywhere between 30 to 60 legislative hearings that were held throughout the state of Florida. So the voters could express their interest in where the lines were drawn and who was going to do this, and the proposed general outcome of these districts.
Mitch, how do you see all of this playing out? Voters seem, even registered Republican voters and independent voters seem a bit uncomfortable by all of this.
Well, and this goes across the board and across the country. I mean, we know that Democratic states said they did it because Texas started it first, but it's really a mess. Gerald talks about maybe the Democrats may not lose all 4 seats that it looks like it. One of them right now, Kathy Castor in the Tampa Bay area, does not look good for her if she continues to run in that district, which would be really pretty radical considering Tampa Bay has always had a Democratic representative going back to Sam Gibbons, I guess beyond that. So that would be pretty major there. Gerald said also that this is all politics, what Ron DeSantis did, and absolutely that's the case. But also DeSantis would say he's been laying the predicate for this based on what the Supreme Court did yesterday, this week, which is they didn't strike down Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but they severely weakened it. And the governor already tried this back in the 22 congressional map when he eliminated a black district that allowed a black candidate to be elected there. Al Lawson was the candidate back then. That changed, and that was it. He was saying was what he was intending to do here, and that's why when the map was drawn up, they really started in South Florida. Congressional District 20 is the one he said was more of a majority-minority district, and that's why he was working on that, and the rest follows.
How many of his Republican colleagues were pointing to the fact that after the 2020 census, Florida did receive more than 700,000 new people into the state? That's
right. That was another argument he has been making, saying that we've got this incredible flood of people here that our current map is not up to date, which is probably true. But a lot of the data they use some new data, but they also mostly had to rely on the U.S. 2020 census because the U.S. Census Bureau only does that once every decade. There was some new information they got from the state, and they worked with that, and they mentioned that. But that being an argument, which you'll hear a lot of Republicans say, is, well, we have to update what we're going right now. They didn't use all those numbers, though, that's up to date in 2025, 2026.
And some folks are taking issue with how they address the issue of those numbers. Before we go on to our next segment, we want to talk about dates to remember if you need to register to vote or change your party affiliation ahead of the August primary. The deadline is July the 20th. To vote in the November general election, the deadline will be October the 5th.